Honorable Member of NCLT, Mr. Suri, my dear friend, CEO, Indian Banks Association, Mr. Mehta, my dear colleague, whole-time member, Dr. Seni, dear insolvency professionals on and off the dais, online and offline, friends, ladies and gentlemen. Let me start with the very basics. That is necessary to reinforce that we are on track, we do not lose our way, and we do not allow our critics to force on us a different way or change our track. Insolvency law is basically, I consider it is a noble law. It's because it comes to the rescue of the person when one needs it most. When someone is in financial distress, company, individuals, partnership firms, or LLPs, one, depending on the interest and choice of the stakeholders, the insolvency comes to the rescue, the life of the company, or maybe at the worst, liquidate the company, release the assets and resources for alternate uses. But this critically hinges on the timelines which the previous speakers have reiterated again and again. This law is for time-bound resolution, and I can't overemphasize its role. But we know that from the data, as you see from the IBBI newsletter, 75% of the CRPs are running above 270 days. All of us have a tendency to say that it is not working, timelines we are not meeting because the adjudicating authority is not disposing of the matters. So please tell me of the CRPs which are exceeded 270 days, how many of them are with the adjudicating authority pending for approval of a resolution plan? Most of these cases are in the hands of the insolvency professionals, not even with the committee of creditors or any other stakeholder. And if you really want that all challenges will be sorted out and life would be much easier for insolvency professionals, then actually you are saying that the work which is meant, which are presently assigned to insolvency professionals can be done by any person. So if life you want an easier life, no challenges, then we really do not need insolvency professionals because we know that this is such a difficult track and only an insolvency professional can guide us. They have been given an exalted status with corresponding powers. And of course, as Mr. Mehta was suggesting, probably time has come to think about incentive-based remuneration. This requires further examination, but the committee of creditors is willing to go also one step further to incentivize the insolvency professionals, but meet the timeline. Courtesy must begin from home. I'll give you several examples how the entire ecosystem is trying to act proactively, which is not very explicitly thrust on the IPs. The IPs, all of you are aware of the concept of authorization for assignment. If it is not issued by the insolvency professional agency within X days, the AFA is deemed to have been issued. Imagine this is the highest form of regulation. The IPs have taken the responsibility that they have to clear. If not, the consequences are that an ineligible person will have AFA. Similarly, registered valuers organization, there is a provision that a valuer member can shift from RVO A to RVO B, and that requires NOC from RVO 1. If RVO 1 does not give NOC, it is deemed to have been issued. Some of you are now familiar with the financial service providers resolution. The administrator there is required to go to RBI and say that this is the resolution applicant the committee of creditors have selected. Is it a person who fits into your framework in terms of fit and proper, whatever guidelines you have depending on the nature of business? RBI is given X days time to say yes or no. If it does not say, imagine the central bank of the country, it is considered as a deemed approval from the central bank of the country. This is the kind of obligations the authorities are taking over. You are familiar with the Competition Commission of India giving the approvals through green channel, again deemed approval. IBBI, what IBBI did in initial days, I'm giving an example of how the challenges are handled and how the authorities are taking on themselves to make it happen. In pre-pack process, the law says 30 days for adjudicating authority. So even the adjudicating authority has to deliver within 30 days. If everyone in the ecosystem has a responsibility, how can IP say that no, I will not bother about 270 days, 180 days? Why can't you tell on 180th day to NCLT that things have not happened and there is no resolution plan, please liquidate it? And you are not doing this because you have not done your job properly. IBBI, what did we are so conscious of timelines. In the initial, as you know, the IBBI code provides that the adjudicating authorities shall appoint an IP within 14 days time. Admit it, you get 14 days time. But then why that 14 days was given? Because sometimes when the financial creditor brings a resolution professional, NCLT is supposed to check with IBBI, is this a person of right kind? Can he be appointed? After taking IBBI's recommendations, NCLT is supposed to appoint. And where the applicant, like operational creditor, has not brought in a resolution applicant, then NCLT seeks a recommendation from IBBI, and similar arrangement is there for other processes also, including liquidation, fresh start process, etc., etc. So in very early days, I went to Honorable Justice Mr. Kumar, President of the NCLT, requested him that, why do you want to make a reference to me and I take a 14 days and there will be postal. In initial few cases it happened, postal communications happened, it got delayed. I told that I am giving you the list of eligible IPs upfront. Just see it online, appoint him, don't make a reference to me. Where the party has not brought in IP, I am giving a panel which is valid for 6 months, clean panel, take up a name you wish. So don't refer to me. So we agreed, it worked well, NCLT blessed, NCLT blessed. And then the law was changed to say that the IP shall be appointed in the order of admission itself. So IBBI had no obligation to do this. Law initially envisaged that they will take 14 days. But why did IBBI come out with this kind of solutions even to save those 14 days time? That could be possible within IBBI's domain, we did it, but many things are not in IBBI's domain. So the point essentially I'm making is that when the entire ecosystem has a willingness to make things happen in a time, and you have a much more flexibility because you have 180, 270. If you have somewhere there's a lapse in the beginning, 1 month, 3 months, you can make it up. But that kind of, like the Honorable Justice Mr. Suri, he gave several examples of how much they have been supportive, giving police protection, or giving the example of Suraj, where somebody is making an evidence application just to complete the formality. Timelines apply equally. Take the example of voluntary liquidation. If the party is coming up and saying that this is a thing, I have a clean position, there are no debts, or if there are any, I have enough money to pay for them, please conclude it. Why should it take a year? Law gives, regulations give 1 year time. Why should it take a more than a year? Then when we did the research, we came to know that many IPs make a reference to various authorities to get a no objection certificate. Where does law envisage a no objection certificate? Entire IBC process, every proceeding says that please make an announcement, get the claims, settle the claims. And Supreme Court says so at the top voice that if some claim is not submitted, it is not considered resolution plan, it is extinguished forever. But then why do you get into seeking NOC from different people and you don't get NOC and you delay it? That means the whole purpose for which the law came, that we want a freedom of exit. Actually, it is insolvency professionals, by getting into these kind of things which are not envisaged in law, we are creating hurdles in exit. And it's not that when I'm talking to you, I talk about you, but when I talk to committee of creditors, I also tell what are the issues there. I'm not saying only with IPs, every solution is there, but I'm giving the example that often we contribute to delay, not realizing its consequences. And IBBI penalizes people, but we also want market should penalize the IPs who are not performing. And how do we want to do it? We will be disclosing every detail of every insolvency process. We have made a beginning already. We will tell people that this is the process this person had taken, and this instead of 330 days, he took 780 days. Against the liquidation value of X, he got this much while the market is getting this much. I'm not comparing with the amount of a claim. I'm talking about the assets available on the ground. Did he get more value as compared to other IPs? Let market select that IP which is giving a better outcome and punish the people who are not performing, and particularly the ones who are very poor on conduct issues. And as Mr. Mehta was mentioning, not many IPs are getting into some kind of deviant behavior, but a few those who are doing, they have actually tarnished the image of the profession. There are quite a few who has done, like SR example, the performance improved during the resolution plan itself. There are people also who have outstandingly conducted as per the code of ethics, but a few have done. Somebody says the law says that, I think my friend Mr. Amit Trivedi was giving the examples, what is, and Mr. Subodh Agarwal was telling you what is the job of RP and what is the job of COC. But sometimes we have a tendency not to do my own job and I want to do his job. He wants to do not his job, he wants to do my job. One example which comes to my mind is that there is an issue whether company A, whether this creditor is a financial creditor or operational creditor. IP decided something, NCLT took a view on that, NCLT told that this is a financial creditor. Then IP presides over a meeting where committee of creditors takes a decision. IP records that the COC says that notwithstanding the decision of the adjudicating authority, we are inclined to consider him as an operational creditor so that I ensure that he does not have a voting right. The second part they did not write, but they wrote that notwithstanding the judgment of NCLT, we are inclined to consider him as a personal creditor. Who gave you that authority? Supreme Court has told whose job is to decide who will be in committee of creditors. But how could committee of creditors do this without the connivance with IP? So IP played a key role in that. In fact, that is why I repeatedly say that behind every scam, there is a scam. Behind every scam, there is not a professional, but behind every scam, there is a professional. Without the assistance of professional, no market participant can play any mischief. So if you hold to your thought correctly, you will not have abuse of things. Mr. Mehta gave the examples of getting the value. It is the job of the committee of creditors. When I talk to them, I tell them that how they should get the value. But you are a professional. It's like if somebody making an IPO uses a merchant banker to get value. You are actually in the position of merchant banker. You are preparing the prospectus and you are trying to get the best value. But have you guided the committee of creditors at any time that this is a company which is failing but viable, having only financial stress, this must be rescued, and this is a company which is failing and unviable, must be closed? Have you taken a view like that? What is this financial strength of that company? Is it viable or not? Committee of creditors is required to assess the feasibility and viability while accepting a resolution plan. Does IP have any idea what are the things which he can guide this COC? These are the matters to be seen whether it is a viable, feasible plan. Except that, saying that he is giving X money, you are getting Y. If it your interest serves, please accept it or reject it. So actually, it is you as a professional, committee of creditors, always the businessmen, they do not know all details. It is the professionals who give the wisdom to them. So can IPs not rise a little above? And Mr. Surya, my friend, was mentioning that sometimes he is finding that matters are getting outsourced. then why do you have been given a license? If you are given a license for something, it is your job, and not that you pass on everything to somebody else because you can engage a professional law allows you. And we came across a case where somebody engages Mr. X to assist him in claim verification, and after 2 months, that guy submits a resolution plan. What is the relationship between professional and this guy? I think these are the examples who are actually inviting disrepute to the profession. In fact, that's why I'm saying that markets should start punishing. In addition to IBBI punishing, markets should start punishing the people, the professionals who are not behaving well. So I told that I want to start the basics. Basics means why IBC is there, why we all are here. Otherwise, we had the experience of, let's say, SICA, BIFR did not deliver. Someone took the decision that let's junk it. So we may not be, history may also write us up that we as a whole, NCLT, IBBI, IPs who had the responsibility, we are failing to deliver under IBC, and let's junk IBC if we don't deliver. So do not think that whatever has come today to us is something given to us and it will remain forever, irrespective of our performance. As we move to market economy, and we are in a market economy today, market can junk anything. Even if law is not abolished, market would decide, I don't think IBC is any more worth it. I will use RBI's framework, a company's Act framework, or something else, because this set of people, this ecosystem is not performing. So it is important that in our own interest, we all of us collectively must perform and remain focused on the IBC's prime objectives. And of course, there are detractors, there are people who want us not to perform, and also we have to respond to them. We get the criticism that there is so much of a liquidation, or we are getting so much of a haircut. I will probably respond to some of that. But these are the ploys by some set of people who are the beneficiaries of the old order, that let's paint a bad picture around this so that this can be junked. So in fact, we must actually defend what we are doing it correctly. So why I'm saying again, why this law provides that it's a reorganization. Reorganization means it says that this is a law for reorganization or insolvency resolution of persons ABC in a time-bound manner with certain objectives. So why like this? It is because we are in a situation, there is a stress, company does not have enough assets, there are many creditors, they want to take their share of the cake when company is not performing. Everybody comes and files a suit somewhere in the court to recover the dues. And as a consequence, company does not have enough assets, creditors will not get all their money, company will die. Then IBC says that let's try out something different. Everybody has a bilateral contract with the company as regards loan, and those contracts cannot be honored. So let's find out something bigger, which overarching contract, which overrides all these bilateral contracts that we call bilateral contracts or incomplete contracts. Insolvency law is the overarching contract which completes all bilateral contracts and makes it feasible, that makes it ensure that the rights, pre-insolvency rights, we ignore the pre-insolvency rights and we say that this is what assets are available. This is the best we can do under the circumstances. Don't insist on pre-insolvency rights. There is a waterfall, there is a framework. This is the rule of the game. We will solve our problem. If possible, we will rescue the company. If not possible, we will close it. The sole objective of the law is reorganization. Reorganization in two ways. Try to rescue the company if possible, if not, close it. That means closing or liquidation is a prescribed means of a resolution. We should not have any, we should not be fretting over that the company is getting liquidated. This is only through liquidation that the idle assets is released for alternate uses, but not that we should liquidate a viable company. We must act responsibly. So the law allows two options and allows the market to choose which one is good in their interest, society's interest. Law does not say that you liquidate it or you rescue it. You know it is your money. You decide what is good for you. But the objective of the law is reorganization. It provides two ways of organization, and such reorganization has several benefits, like it promotes entrepreneurship, improves credit availability, maximizes the value of the assets of creditors, balances the interests of stakeholders. These are the objective. Law has only one objective, that is reorganization. These are the benefits. So we must remain focused on this. That means whether the processes under the code are reaching to reorganization, either way, we are agnostic because we are interested in more efficient use of resources. Is it reorganizing? And if so, at what time frame and at what cost? Thereafter, whether the outcome has maximized the value. These are the only parameters we have to look at to assess the code, not get carried away by how much haircut, how many liquidations. There are issues, not that these are not issues. Why haircut is an important issue, we must address it. But for the IBC purposes, we must look at, has it reorganized? Because I always give an example. There was a famous rule called Tinbergen rule. It's named after the first Nobel winner of the economic sciences. It's named after him. That the law is said that there can be, in fact, it talks about a basic principle of public policy. The public policy is good or it works well if it has one objective. There can be many policies to achieve one objective, but don't have one policy to achieve four objectives. If you have that, you have one policy to achieve more than one objective. That means actually you are trying to kill two birds with one stone. And if the birds are flying in opposite directions, you cannot do it. And law can provide, as I told you, many options for resolution or reorganization. Companies Act provides, RBI framework provides, the people can reorganize outside the any law. There can be many approaches to reorganization, but IB says one objective, that is a reorganization, and we have to see it in the context of a reorganization. But there are ways others look at it. World Bank has been looking at it one way, which of course we had the report till 19. Last year they junked, and yesterday we got the news that they have completely abandoned the idea of assessing the ease of doing business in countries. But 3 years they did. The past 3 years of IBC, they did in terms of resolving insolvency. They look at cost of resolution, time taken for resolution, realization for creditors. In those terms, they found that India's ranking in insolvency, resolving insolvency, improved from 136 to 52 in 3 years. And that may not be the perfect way to look at, but that gives some indication. So in short span of 5 years of its existence, the code has revolutionized the insolvency resolution process. It has established the supremacy of the market. It is the creditors and the resolution applicants that take decisions, resolution professionally, they are just to assist them professionally. And it has also established the rule of law, and it has professionalized the insolvency resolution process. So from providing freedom of exit to rescuing the firms in financial stress, helping the creditors to realize their dues, allowing the entrepreneurs and these resources stock up in inefficient uses for more efficient uses, and more importantly, bringing about the significant behavioral change among the debtors and creditors alike. The achievements, the list of achievements of the code is a long one. So therefore, if you have to assess the objective, you have to really understand what kind of mischievous campaigns are being made by using the non-parameters or something not very relevant, using that to assess the efficiency of the insolvency. America, as you are familiar with, the Chapter 7 and Chapter 11 proceedings. These have both personal and individual, corporate and individual. I'm only limiting to corporate. 7 is the proceeding, that means a decision to liquidate right away. 11 is the proceeding, restructure it. In fact, American system, their market, they allow the market to decide to liquidate for this company, restructure another company. But here we say that no, we do not want that. You must go through CRP route, try out, examine if it is viable, feasible. If not, go for liquidation. So our approach is slightly different. But the point I am making is that today in America, of the applications of corporates filed under Chapter 7 and 11 taken together, 2/3 of them are filed under Chapter 7. That means market has upfront decided to liquidate 2/3 of the companies. And only 1/3 they are trying their luck whether they can be rescued or not. So when we come about the liquidation versus resolution here, we have to look at this kind of data. And you please look at the data in European countries. You will be surprised to see, and probably when our the so-called so many 2/3, 3/4 getting into liquidation is far better actually. And in fact, there's nothing to really feel bad about it. If we want competition and innovation, then companies must have natural death. Then otherwise efficiency will not come. So we have seen that there are criticism that it is a tool for haircut, but if it is axiomatic that if a company does not have enough assets to fully repay its creditors, the companies which came, I have the data for sale at the end of March 21, some of you might look at the June 21 data newsletter. The companies which have been reserved, about 400 companies or so, when they came to IBC, they had assets valued at 22% of the amount of claims against them. That means at the time of entry, the creditors were staring at a haircut of 70, 80%. The process ended up in realizing 37, 38, 39. That means reducing the haircut to 60% in addition to rescuing the companies. Every other option would have closed the company, rescued the company, reduced the haircut. Those who tell that there is so much of haircut, but did it increase haircut or did it reduce the haircut? Did the company have haircut because of IBC or it had something else? Of course, Mr. Mehta told we have to work on developing the stressed assets market. That will give value. We should work on that. All that I told RP is taking to time, proper advice and viability, feasibility. In fact, proper use of IBC can reduce haircut, but it may not be. The companies which have gone into liquidation, they had assets on average at 6% of the value when they entered into the IBC process. We had Gotaringa Minerals, Orchid Healthcare. They together owed 8,163 crore to financial creditors with zero assets, and therefore it was 100% haircut. We had companies like Binani Cements. We had companies like there is 100% recovery in zero haircut. So what explains why in one company we have zero haircut, another in 100% haircut? Is it because of IBC? Why does stock market prices double in 6 months, become half in another 6 months? Is it because the health of the stock market is changing? The stock market index reflects something which has happened or not happened in the economy, not to do with the health of the security market. Yes, it has a role, but not significant role. So stock market is discovering a price, not that if you say that the stock market today, we say it's gone up to 58,000, 59,000, it's more than double in the last 6 months. Does it mean that the health of the stock market has doubled? But it reflects something else. So similarly, the haircut is not a reflection of the IBC process. So it all depends, critically depends on, it depends on so many things, the capability of the resolution applicants to assess, capability of committee of creditors, marketing efforts, so many things, state of the distress market, but critically depends on at what stage the company has reached the IBC process as much as a patient reaches hospital. The best hospital can do little if some patient reaches the hospital with a significant haircut to its health. So if the company has been sick for years, assets have been significantly depleted, IBC may yield huge haircut or may be liquidation. But how do we look at haircut? We look at 1 minus the amount of realization upon the amount of the claims. But look at what comprises of amount of a claim and amount of realization. Amount of claim includes claims against the loan as well as a guarantee. Often the claim is doubly counted. It includes The loans which have been written about 10 years ago, but it includes interest on that and interest on that. On the other side, how does realization include? Realization includes the clean part of it, does not include the value of equity which will come after 5 years. Does not include the value that will be realized from disposal of avoidance transactions. Does not include the money that will be realized from personal guarantors. If you overestimate the denominator, underestimate the numerator, then you actually do not get a fair picture. The fair picture you would get if you compare the realization in comparison to the assets available on the ground. It's not that the market will not give a value because company owes so much things to creditors. Market will give the value. Market or IBC maximizes the value of the assets existing, not the assets which exist at some point of time. In that terms, we are getting about 170, 175, 180% on average. That means any other option would have given us, if you have just sold it, 100 minus cost of transaction, we are getting 80, 90 rupees extra. That is the bonus. The narrative about the liquidation I just talked about. We are looking at the only finishing game where we find that there are only 2,400 players, 2,000 players, 400 liquidation, 1,500, 400 resolution, 1,500 liquidation. But that is only the end product. But what happened before that? We are not looking at. 20,000 applications were withdrawn before admission. After admission, there are withdrawals. There are something also appeals here, so many things. But and there are also 2,000, 3,000 still ongoing. So we are looking only a small set and then claiming that these many are getting liquidated. But you have to look at the entire thing. It's like this is actually a system of a treatment. It's not just like, let's say, talk about allopathic medicine. Forget about the what people get relief by OTC medicines, by having their own vaccinations. But look at the people who have reached the hospital. Of the people who reach hospital, probably 80–90% got relief in OPD. Some got relief in secondary hospital, tertiary, quaternary hospital. Only few get into the finishing line, probably ventilator or something very critical surgical process. And of them, some survive, some do not. So, but before that, the people who got relief, patients got relief, those have to be considered. If you consider IBC as a system, and if I look at the entire number of companies who have touched the IBC, the percentage of companies getting liquidity is insignificant, but I am ignoring the settlement resolutions or settlements happening outside the IBC, not coming to IBC. The moment somebody receives a notice from operational creditor, comes and settles it. That also happens in the shadow of IBC, for which we do not have data. And even at the finishing touch line, if you look at only the end game, the companies which have proceeded for liquidation, 3/4 were defunct. The companies which have been rescued, 1/3 of them were defunct. That means 2/3 were defunct to start with. And I talked about the resolution value. So if you look at in totality, actually you have to look at not even at the end game, not the number of companies, but what is the value of distressed assets rescued. In the value terms, the distressed assets rescued is 70%, distressed assets proceeding for liquidation is 30%. These narratives are important to ensure that people do not derail the reforms. But I anticipate that as we get rid of the pre-IBC legacy matters, a recent stress comes into the place, liquidations will be much less. But I re-emphasize that it is through liquidations, both the entrepreneur and the assets stuck up in the so-called Chakravyuha. The word Chakravyuha was used to describe this in the economic survey of 2016. So they will get out of the Chakravyuha, and it is this route that enables, and there in fact, that's why I gave the example of voluntary liquidation. That is the pure exit route, and that should not take even a year. But code has also several things, proactive things. That's why I told that many are getting resolved through in the shadow of the IBC. Let me talk about, since I talked about this noble law and the IBCs are caretakers. I just wanted to emphasize, since all of you are familiar with the corporate management, we know that companies are modern engines of growth and they are the hope of prosperity for the posterity. They have the organizational capital over and above their liquidation value, and closure of the company destroys the hope and the organizational capital. It takes years to build a company. So the life of a company is as precious as that of a human being. We created this company thinking that we humans cannot live long, but let's create the companies which will live much long after. Some companies I know, at least in history, if you look at this company called Kongo Gumi, Japanese company that was engaged in temple construction, that survived 1428 years before it succumbed to what? To debt. To debt in 2006. Today we have a few 1,000-year-old, 1,000-year young, I would say, companies around, but their number is very few. The life of a company is in danger today than any time before. The average life of a S&P 5 company, S&P 500 companies reportedly reduced from 90 years to 18 years in the last century. During this time, the longevity of humans has increased from 30 to 90 people. Just the opposite has happened. A research in 2015, Yale University research says that the average life of a publicly traded company, considering the IBC kind of things, including mergers, acquisitions, bankruptcy, is about 10 years. So the company which has indefinite life lives much shorter than a human. This is where the IBC is coming to picture. Who are the enemies of the company? Who are the enemies of the lives of the company? The soul, the raison d'etre of the company, that it must live and it must serve, generate value and share the value from stakeholders for all times to come. It has three enemies. The first enemy is within, that is all inefficiencies. Because the stakeholders are dispersed stakeholders, everybody has a different perspective, or somebody is trying to gain at the cost of another. The engagement of different stakeholders varies with the company. Somebody sits far away from company, thousands of kilometers high, somebody is managing company. So there are issues, there are principal agent issues, there are transmission loss. The interest of one stakeholder may conflict with that of another, and even maybe with the interest of the company, stakeholders may work at cross purposes. So in their drive to maximize their own wealth, because company firm gives the limited liability benefit. That means the decision makers have a limited liability while they have the authority to put the entire society to unlimited liability. Take the example of Bhopal gas tragedy. So somebody is benefiting at the cost of another and not bothering about Bhopal gas tragedy. There are several such instances, including recent one, Satyam fiasco, which recast the corporate governance things. But such conduct kills the lives of the company, and that's why we have so much of arrangement like a key managerial personnel, independent director, related party transaction, corporate social responsibility. So many norms have developed which fancifully we call it corporate governance norms. Not that corporate governance did not exist earlier, but these have become important now. So the authorities have come up with one mechanism in corporate governance to protect the lives of the company. That is the first enemy. The second enemy is the unfair battles at the marketplace. That means if I am paying tax and you are not paying tax, that means I am dodging 35% tax. We too cannot compete at marketplace, and definitely you cannot survive. If I am somehow managing, you are an honest person, I am managing. The law, the market requires a rule of law. So if there's an unfair competition, someone has a financial muscle to sell a product below cost for a long time and another does not have, then there cannot be any competition. So against these unfair battles, there's a mechanism. We have a competition authority to ensure that nobody abuses dominance, if there's a rule of law. So it is the state responsibility normally to protect the life of a company against unfair battles. But there is the third enemy, but most fierce enemy is the competition and innovation at marketplace. And it is fair because it is the state policy to promote competition and innovation, because we know the growth comes from competition and innovation, and we want higher the competition, higher the innovation, still better. And if in the process some companies dies, does not matter, but we will retrieve those assets and put it back to company quickly, so they start again getting reused. So since it has potential to give high growth, but company may lose its life. In fact, in case of the innovation part, which we call creative destruction, actually creative destruction destroys more companies than it creates. The law provides layers of security to protect a company. First, it says that let there be a board of directors. let them engage and supervise the conduct of a regular contractual management, and throw them, the managing director or the management people, if they are not performing, replace them by under contractual law, bring a more efficient people. But if they can't do this, the board of directors are not performing, shareholder has a right to throw out the shareholder and bring another set of, sorry, throw out the board of directors, bring another set of board of directors. And then if still they are not succeeding, market allows through market for corporate control to bring a new set of shareholders to replace the existing set of shareholders. And even with all that, if they are failing, the shareholders have failed, equity managers, equity owners have failed, then IBC comes as a last resort, where we allow the creditors to come in, take over and rescue the company. So that is why I consider that IBC is a noble law and IPs are caregivers. And caregivers can't feel bad if there are challenges. Their job is to give the care in the most distance time. And how does it? It rescue the company, it creates a committee of creditors, and it gives a kind of most powerful weapon. You can make three important weapons it gives to a committee of creditors, but IP has to help him. So what are the unusual powers of the committee of creditors as compared to the S2L regime is that the first is it has a right, of course, in the better interest of the company, to write up the claims of anyone, including of any creditor. So no other law allows actually sitting I can write up the dues of the government, of the creditor, or another financial creditor, even a secured creditor. But they have to do by majority decision. So committee of creditors can take or give haircut of any amount to any stakeholder if it is required to save the company. That's what Supreme Court has in last week in so many orders. Supreme Court has again reiterated that saving life of a company is far more important. Second is, unlike in earlier system, the creditors had the opportunity to negotiate with the existing owners or promoters. Now it says that you go to the entire market, anyone, everyone from the country, outside the country, entire world is a market, get the best resolution plan, whosoever can give, that's welcome. So now choice is limited to the entire world. And third is resolution plan. You have to resolve through resolution plan, which is defined to mean something which resolves the stress of the company. No fetters, absolutely. Do anything and everything, including change of management, technology, product portfolio. It can mean acquisition or disposal of assets, businesses, undertakings, restructuring of organization, business model, ownership, even the balance sheet, and including all the strategies of turnaround, buyout, merger, amalgamation, takeover, acquisition, whatever you name it, everything is possible through a resolution plan. And that's why Regulation 37 of the gives an illustrative list of things possible, which came in fact to the rescue of when synergy through resolution was contested that how can a company get amalgamated. It took 2 years for the NCLAT, the final decision to come out, but it relied on that. And recently Standing Committee of the Finance has told that Regulation 37, whatever it provides, is ought to be in statutes, not in a subordinate legislation. So that is the realization that the kind of opportunity, kind of flexibility committee of creditors have and resolution applicants have to restructure the company to resolve the stress. And this kind of powers are given with a further caveat that please consider resolution plan from the people who are capable, clean, deserving, they do not suffer from 29-year ineligibility. And in the entire game, IP has a prime place, starting from the day one, taking over the company, keeping the company as a going concern. If it remains as a going concern, market will offer a higher value for the operational business than a closed business. So we have to realize that sometimes we see that somebody says that the company was not going when I started, I took over, what can I do? And sometimes they say that I'm not getting in interim finance, and so many excuses why I'm not able to keep the company run. And if you can't, if your company was running and you are not able to run, actually then IBC is doing something probably not acceptable. So it can't be several things like the value lost in avoidance transactions. Why my technical member, our technical member referred to that particular case. Value lost in avoidance transactions have to be retrieved. Section 66(2) says that please file an application stating the amount of potential loss to the creditor in the time period twilight June, when the insolvency should have commenced and when it actually commenced. If you file in 50 cases, there will be no resistance to admission of an application. So people are fighting before NCLT to delay the admission because there are no consequences. But if you bring this consequence, I don't see there can be very genuine cases, frivolous resistance will not be there. So I think our time is, we have to close it. I think, like again, we said that our process is time bound. So let's try to be time bound. Our target is 1:30. I think Mr. Madan has also something to say. So with this, I conclude. Thank you. Thanks to the Chartered Accountants, IIIP, for giving the opportunity. And it's important that it is without the Institute of Chartered Accountants, Company Secretaries, Cost Accountants, we could not have got IPA. And had we not got IPA in October 16, November 16, we could not have started corporate insolvency resolution on 1st December. So it's a big thank you to these 3 institutes for coming forward to sponsor the IPS. And thanks to the IPS also, including I started with the example that IPS have a responsibility of deemed approval, that kind of responsibility they are taking. So IPs have to rise to the occasion. Thank you.